Yeah, so my name is Javier Godar from the Stockholm Environment Institute, which is an environmental or sustainability think tank, international. We have offices in 10 countries. And we are, as part of what we are doing in SEI, we have developed a platform, a data-driven platform that I'm going to show you, which is called Trase. It is online. You can actually access it on your own. And I think we were working with connected data without knowing it. It was about February, last February or March when we first met James that we realized that this is actually a thing and that we would like to know more about it and we would like to explore it. So hopefully my presentation will provide with some first-hand lessons learned from people that actually get into this world without previous experience. I'm going to refer a bit to the problem that we are trying to tackle, just because I am very aware that this is not a sustainability conference. We used to take these things for granted. But I'm going to first talk about a couple of issues that are going on. As you may know, for many people, we are right now in the human epoch. There's a lot of cause for concern in the world, because the humans have managed, for the first time in history, to influence all dimensions of the biosphere. So there's microplastics and toxins in each drop of the water in the ocean. There's pollution in there, biodiversity loss, extinctions, incredible land use changes, and so forth. Much of this is being driven by teleconnections, telecouplings between different places of the world, teleconnections that actually create good outcomes in terms of human development, but at the same time come with a lot of trade-offs in terms of environmental conservation. And we in Trase focus specifically in trade. This is just an image of the global shipping density some few years ago. Trade is increasing a lot. And not only the trade of physical goods, also trade of ideas and these kind of flows, but we are going to focus today in the trade of physical flows. Because of this trade and these teleconnections, we are in a moment in which each of us are having an enormous footprint, which actually can be measured. And yeah, as we all know, there is this kind of accounts for how much impact there is in a cup of coffee that we take, and so forth. This is a huge research field. And to start with, we are actually focusing on tropical forests, because obviously it's an important part of the picture. There you see the island of Borneo in Indonesia, which is about 3 times bigger than the UK. This is the situation of the forest in 2010. What you see in dark green is the area with primary forest that can still be considered intact or high value. But just in 1973, this was the picture of the forest in Borneo. So you can see that there's a big difference. This has been driven mostly by palm oil production and trade. Palm oil is everywhere in all the products that we are consuming in the supermarket. It's actually a thing that we could substitute by other things, but it's so cheap, and there's such a good supply chain in terms of logistics and know-how and so forth that we are using a lot of palm oil. So that was the cause for concern, but also there is cause for hope. I'm just going to provide an example related with tropical forest. In the year 2014, a New Year's Declaration on Forest made by 37 countries, 53 multinational companies that are the larger ones, actually. And NGOs and so forth, they decided that they will sign a pledge to have half the deforestation by 2020, in 2.5 years. And by 2030, they will not have deforestation in their supply chains. These companies, for example, don't know really how to do that, and obviously they haven't done much since 2014. And this is where organizations like ours try to help with. So as a consequence of all these pledges and interest for changing the situation, there's a lot of cross-sector partnerships. Here you can see some of them. Maybe you know the Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, or the Tropical Forest Alliance, or the Banking Environment Initiative. Very interesting things. And all of us, researchers and partnerships and institutions, kind of think in the supply chain as that glass of champagne that you see there. So that will be a representation of a supply chain in which you have 7 billion consumers on the top. You will have about 1.5 billion producers in the world in the bottom. And then the low-hanging fruit is to actually influence the very, very few companies, about 300, 400 companies that actually are trading the vast majority of these farming commodities that affect tropical deforestation. Also, there are very few commodity supply chains that are driving this deforestation. So the idea is that they are the greatest point of leverage, and they are the ones we are trying to work with mostly. So they actually move forward, and hopefully the whole system will notice if they change their behavior. Yeah, and there's a lot of increase in accountability. Colleagues from Global Canopy Program, which is our partner in Trase, for example, they give information about these companies and their pledges. Their Global Forest Watch, for example, is monitoring deforestation almost live, and they have a website where you can see where deforestation is happening at any given moment with some weeks of delay. So there's hope. There's a lot of movement lately, and there's a whole new space. And there's where I guess I'm in this conference, because there's a lot of opportunity for change, and much of it comes from the information age. Maybe it's not the right term, but it's the one we use. Related, obviously, with the increased computational power, the amount of data out there, connected data, all these sensors out there, satellites looking at what is going on the field, sensors measuring pollution, extinction, and so forth. To the point that many believe that transparency is the new green right now. So many people believe that, and I'm not naive, that's another discussion, maybe not for this conference, but at least if we will have transparency in what is going on and the accountability of all the actors and all of us who enjoy the benefits of a supply chain, that will contribute a lot to improve the situation. So what we did in Trase is to wonder if the current capabilities, the information that is out there, will be enough to deliver the supply chain transparency that is needed. And we saw that that's not the case. So this is more or less a picture of what is going on. What is the knowledge gap for us? Right now, there is a growing amount of data on territorial performance, for example, deforestation. There's increasing amount of data on actor performance, what these companies or producers or consumers are doing. But there's no connection between these two dimensions. And this is the space that we aim to cover with Trase, as you're going to see soon. So what we want to do is to cover this middle way between these two dimensions. And very quickly, right now you have footprint. So again, how much deforestation is embedded in your cup of coffee, which doesn't tell you nothing about who is enjoying, who is benefiting from that deforestation, which company is selling you the coffee or anything like that, or where the impact is happening. And we have some very few bespoke traceability systems, and companies that have managed to create pilots in which they actually trace their own supply chain, at least part of their supply chain, and they know exactly what is going on. But this is currently impossible to scale up. It will be too expensive and so forth. So we try to cover something in the middle. And now directly into Trase. It's a free access online information and decision support transparency platform. We are mostly working with or targeting governments, companies, and investors. And I will talk about the investment part later because it's the one more related to this conference. To better understand and address the environmental and social impacts of their supply chains. They have an interest in improving things, and we want to give them the information that they need. And the vision is that by 2020, which is the first time limit for the new declaration of forests that I mentioned before, by 2020, the vast majority of these companies, governments, and so forth will see Trase as a place to go in case they are concerned about these things. It's very ambitious, but we are also receiving good support from donors, and it's hopefully going more or less well. Before I show the platform directly, I'm going to comment on the data because I think that will facilitate your understanding of the platform. So what we basically are using is large data. We are still not in the big data realm, but maybe we will be soon, on per-shipment customs data, custom declarations provided by governments, bills of lading, which are private contracts between the carriers and the traders, and sometimes shipping manifests too. Tax ID records in all these countries, depicting the activities of these companies, where their assets are, for example, their silos or crushing facilities or retailing locations. Domestic logistics data on ports and roads and all the things that are involved in the supply chain. High resolution production data, self-declarations from their websites or other sources, documents. For example, data from inspections and sanitary registries. There's a veterinary system in many countries, and then using that veterinary system, which is for sanitary purposes, we can know how many cows were in a given place, who owned them, and so forth. So we use this information for tracing the location of a commodity in time. And we have been organizing all this information in a PostgreSQL database. Although, as I will mention later, we are starting to use graph databases for specific purposes. So I'm going to jump into the showing a bit the Trave platform, which is this one. And I'm going to stay here. Maybe you can see. So this is a depiction of a supply chain. In this case, it's a Brazilian soy supply chain in the year 2015. We have other years and other commodities there. And what you see is the totality of the soy exported by Brazil in a given year. So no ton of soy is escaping from our system. And what you see on the left is, on the left of this Sankey diagram, this flow diagram, is the municipalities of production. There are 5,500 in Brazil, in different biomes and with different environmental and social values. The name of the exporter, the trader, the name of the importer in countries like the UK or any other country, and the country of destination. We have also other things like the port, for example, and so forth. And we could actually provide with more information, but we think this is enough to start with. This is a flow of tones, but we could also rescale this by, for example, the financial flow. So what is the amount of dollars involved in this supply chain? And then you will see that Bunge, for example, is dealing with $4 billion of soy in that particular year. Coming back to tones, this is the main one. And you could also resize it by deforestation and any other indicator. So what you could do with Trave, you could do many things, but I'm going to show, for example, I'm from Spain, so imagine that I'm interested in the impact driven by Spain, and that I'm interested in a given, well, you will see directly which municipalities are related with Spain, the ones that you see there in shadows. If you click, for example, in one of the major traders, Cargill, you will see that the amount of municipalities that are related with Cargill and Spain are reduced, and you know exactly where Cargill and Spain are sourcing. You could have a better view of the supply chain of just Spain and Cargill. So you will have the main municipalities where Spain and Cargill are related or are sourcing soy from. So the main one is Sapezal. And you see, if you click in Sapezal, you will see that it appears here. We know that Sapezal is, Spain and Cargill are getting 53,000 hectares from Sapezal, as you see down there. Well, we have located a place. We could get a fact sheet from this place. So just by clicking there, you will see that you get the basic statistics about this place. What is it? How much soy it has? Deforestation, and other indicators for the year of interest. So lots of indicators that as an investor or as a trader you can actually get and inform your systems. All this information, I forgot to mention, you can download in tables and CSV tables in our website. So it's open for anyone. And you can do many things that I guess are important for the financial sector, for example, for investors who want to include this kind of information in their decisions. And I'm not going to enter into a lot of detail, but just showing you that you can do many things and you can actually have many different concerns. So here you have a list of indicators that you can embed in the supply chain flow or that you can visualize in the map. So for example, I could be interested in places with a lot of soy production here. I will go to agricultural indicators and maybe social indicators. For example, the smallholder dominance. I want to know as a journalist, for example, or as an investor, which places are producing a lot of soy and where there are a lot of smallholders. So potentially there's conflict between small family farming and large producers. So I can do that by selecting smallholder dominance. And here you get a palette of colors from lots of smallholder dominance in red, lots of soy production in blue, and both things at the maximum in black. So directly, you will see that there are some specific places, concretely there, that have a lot of soy production and lots of smallholders. I don't have the time to do that, but actually Bom Jesus, this place, is one of the places where more conflicts are happening in Brazil. So in a few clicks, you actually can disentangle the complexity of a supply chain and get your stories and so forth. There's the possibility also of visually looking at deforestation polygons, for example. Sorry, I went too far. So here you will have the deforestation polygons. These are the places where deforestation occurred in a given year. So it's nothing preventing you from actually getting your own properties or going with a GPS and saying, okay, I'm interested in this particular place because I know the owner. Did he have deforestation in that particular year or not? Is it related with soy or not? So yeah, there's a lot of information here, and let's talk about the data system because it will be too long to actually. I'm good in time? Or? Yeah. How many minutes?
Another 5 minutes until questions.
Wow, no, I don't have too much time.
Well,
so
7 to 8 minutes.
Just go to Trase.earth if you want to know more about all the potential things that you can do. Well, some relevant learnings for this particular platform. The use of large and big data for sustainability issues is in its infancy. So actually, if something has not been done, it's because no one has tried. That's my main thing. We are really among the first 3-4 enterprises or projects that are starting to use large and big data to actually look at these kind of sustainability issues. There's a lot of data out there. It's just you cannot just look in the normal repositories of environmental data. You actually need to look, for example, in sanitary registries. You need to look into unexpected places and think out of the box about which data can help you, which is something that we are trying to do because we are multidisciplinary. So we have economists and we have other people that actually can think out of the box. We always need to think ahead. We need to prepare the data to be linkable with other data, even if that data doesn't exist now. I mean, it's impossible that some of the data we imagine is not going to come in the next few years because it makes sense. And because there's a lot of money involved in those impacts and there's a lot of interest out there. So we are actually preparing ourselves to incorporate this kind of data. Do the same with the database and the back end. So the back end, from the very beginning, we try to accommodate many nodes, many different relationships between the data sets, and we are enjoying that now, that we actually were thinking ahead 2 years ago. And with the database, although maybe now the graph database is not necessary in the basic Trace setup, we think that we are going to need it, for example, for financial network mapping and so forth. So we are starting to implement it and creating a pilot. And another thing is that the more data that we have, the more data we find out that becomes relevant. So it is important to actually create your own standards, your own IDs for your specific tables that you have. So when the data comes, so when data that you was not using comes, you actually can link it. There's a couple of ongoing developments beyond what you just saw that are understanding investments and financial networks, as I mentioned before, and also complex indicators alongside the supply chains. Let's see if I have time for this. We are doing this with Neural Alpha with James and colleagues. They are implementing a prototype in which we have a graph database in Neo4j, using semantics. Don't know if artificial intelligence, but I had that in my notes. Linked data to acquire, visualize, and analyze the role of investments in driving, in being linked to the supply chains that we are mapping. We are focusing on equity, sovereign, and other fund holdings, lending, legal structures, corporate news, and mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, and all these relationships that we want to map. We don't want to stay in the traders in the supply chain. We want to know who is investing in those traders and what are the relationships between these traders and others, other companies, not necessarily traders. This is a depiction of the graph data model that we have with the different entities and links between these entities. Just as an example, these are the main entities with the amount of units or unique entities that we have for each of those. So for example, we have 3,137 corporates. We have 112 countries of import or consumption and so forth. And right now we have a screening tool in which you can look at one of these traders that we have in the supply chain and try to understand the relationship with other corporates and all these things. And as well as information on events, news that we can get about these companies. Obviously, there's a big potential of taking the data from Trace into your way of scraping this data from open corporates, from Thomson Reuters, and so forth, to actually enrich the way in which the data can be scraped. Do I have a minute? Yeah. And another thing that I think is relevant in terms of us moving from large data to big data is that we are looking at shipping emissions and also at calculating the carbon emissions in each of the steps of the supply chain. But I'm going to focus only on shipping emissions. Oh, sorry. So this is a little video. This is a depiction of the movements of all the vessels in the world in a given day. You have the date there. And you have the carbon emissions, I think it's every 35 seconds that each of these vessels is having one. That's the aggregate of all the vessels. So each of the vessels have a transponder, which is called the AIS system. And every 35 seconds, they are pinging their location, their speed, revolutions per minute. We know their IMO, which is the plate number of all these vessels. And using that information and linking it with data on the efficiency of the engines of that particular vessel and so forth, we calculate the carbon emissions. This is done by colleagues from the University College London, actually. And what we do in Trase is that we know, so this is 200,000 vessels. Every 35 seconds, they ping signals. So we are talking about 200,000 vessels times 30 million points every year. And what we know in Trase from our purchase of these custom declarations and bills of lading is the exact content of each of these vessels. So if they have 20 iPhones, 5 cars, and 200 tons of soy, we know that. So we can actually slice those emissions by each of these commodities, therefore providing companies and consumers with an accurate accounting of the carbon that is associated with your consumption or your production and trade. And here we are starting to get into big data. This is a massive project because obviously we want to do many years and so forth. And this can also be linked with the rest of Trase in terms of understanding not only this movement between one country of production and countries of consumption, but also the local consequences in Trase or the going all the way to the consumer in our countries. So it's a major project that we are putting forward now. And thank you. I hope this was useful.
Thanks to Javier. We've got a decent amount of time for questions. If anyone has any.
Yeah, hi. Did you actually make a data model for this, and how did you do that? Or was it straight data into the system?
So we have a decision tree to try to match all these data sets as well as possible. There are very few assumptions because we have managed, in the case of Brazil, for instance, to get very good data. And then we just find smart ways of plugging the data with each other. In the beginning, we started with a model that was taking many assumptions, but we have been getting rid of these assumptions for the most part. It's a basic decision tree, well, complicated decision tree, but didn't require any special technology or anything. We are doing everything in Python. We use Python to program the things, and as I said, PostgreSQL database, now on the cloud.
Question in the meantime, maybe you could elaborate on why soy in particular is a sensitive kind of forest product and what the implications of consuming soy-based products are.
So soy is one of the main commodities in the world in terms of volume. And it was not that big 20 years ago, but most part of our livestock systems everywhere in the world depend on soy. So 95% of the soy is not consumed by humans directly. It's consumed by cattle, poultry, pork, fishes in farms, and so forth. So it's basically our protein-rich commodity that is very cheap because in those areas, people don't have to pay a lot for the land or nothing at all. They just grab the land and they put it. And there's a lot of good technology and industrial processes to actually transform the soy into a lot of different things that are very useful for the industry, including biofuels, for example.
Hi, thanks for the talk. You said earlier on about preparing the data to be linked. Can you say a little bit more concretely about what that involves?
Yeah, so in the beginning, we were treating each of the companies, and we have many, with our own codes until we learn about the perm IDs. And obviously, we are creating extra perm IDs because not all the companies are they are so small. We cover even small companies that export 10 tons or something. So we actually need to create our own identifiers. But we are now using perm IDs. Each of these regions in the whole world have a code that is unique and identifies them. And there's a huge program which is called GADM, I think, Global Administrative Database. which have numbers for all these territories at different levels. We use the AIS codes from the trade system, so we use also the depiction of each of the things that are exported. You have a code for very, very specific for example, bag of soybeans of more than 5 liters. It will have a code. So we are using these codes to be linked with other data sets. We are using these plates from the vessels and looking for other databases that have the same code so we can actually link them and so forth. We are all the time, if it doesn't exist, we look for someone who actually have created a standard. If we don't find it, which is rare, we create our own standard and think about the logic of that standard. For example, if a territory will have sub-territories, we give room for that and we create a logic chain for actually understanding that.
Sorry, actually, there was one other quick question as well on the demo. Earlier on, we saw an exporter and an importer column, and then countries on either side. I guess I sort of visualized supply chains as having a lot more links in the chain. Was I missing something there? Because it almost looked like there was just one hop or 2 hops.
There are 4 columns. Yeah, right now we could put more. Sorry. So, I mean, there's a limit to what the user can do with a Sankey diagram, in my opinion. So now, for example, that we are entering into these complex financial networks, I don't think we will include them in the Sankey. Originally, the first thing when we thought in finance, we were thinking that maybe the money would come from up. We would think in these lines as the pipes of the global economy, and the investors from up will pump the money or something like that. It was visually or philosophically it's very interesting. But obviously, it's not only one investor. It's several investors, and they are related with each other, and they depend on others, and so forth. So we need to change the paradigm on how to visualize that. This is why we started with the graph database. And I don't know how we are going to include that information. Maybe you could click in one of the traders and then get into a neural network visualization to actually understand who is who. There are many ways of doing this, but it's going to be complicated. Yeah.
So one more question is in terms of the financial data, what kinds of sources are you looking at for sourcing that data, and what kinds of things are you interested in?
So Neural Alpha, this company that is working with us, is looking at Thomson Reuters, Open Corporates, and a list of about 12 or so sources. I think there's a lot of potential in actually looking not only in English language, but also, for example, in Portuguese, to the rich amount of data that you have on these smaller companies that do not appear in the big Bloombergs and Thomson Reuters. So yeah, and I think it's, as I said before, I think that including the information we have in Trase into the search could help a lot, because I forgot to mention, but when we buy this data, there are many columns that we are not yet using. So we have the name of the board members, we have the address, the telephones, and many, many other things that could actually help finding more information about these companies. And we are providing the link with a specific place, so you could actually look for place A in relationship with Cargill and find Google if there's anyone that at any time have ever written about a relationship there, like conflict with a company or an investment of that company in that municipality and so forth. So I think we can actually help be a source of information too.
Okay, big thanks to Javier.